He honed his entrepreneurial leadership skills in homeland Holland in industries from marine salvage to sportswear. He reincarnated a legendary Dutch name from the 1920s for high-performance vehicles. He then led this new micro company to buy a much larger Swedish automaker, being shuttered by its owner. Victor R. Muller, CEO of Spyker Cars and Chair of Saab Automobile, is this week's leader on leadership.
Knowing when to ask for help is critical when you're in a leadership position.
It's getting the best out of people. That's the essence of leadership.
Major funding for Leaders on Leadership is provided by Greenleaf Trust.
Helping people manage their wealth, accumulate assets, and preserve those assets for generational continuity implies trust. We are sitting down on the same side of the desk as you are. We're planning for your financial needs.
Additional funding provided by the Wayne State University School of Business Administration.
Welcome to Leaders on Leadership, here with a student audience at St. Andrews Hall on the campus of Wayne State University. I'm Larry Fobes. Victor Muller's passion for automobiles began very early, and ironically, his childhood home in Amsterdam overlooked a Saab dealership. Thanks for being here, Victor.
Thanks, Larry. Glad to be here.
I read someplace, you've got this reputation for being a deal maker and for having a passion for cars. Did I read someplace that you started your collection of cars before you were licensed, old enough to drive, and you had a fairly unique financing partner?
Well, yes, that is all true. I have to admit, we started right off the bat with my grandmother being my first financier. She borrowed me the first 1,000 guilders at the time, would be like $500 today, to buy my first Lancia in 1978. But I didn't have my driver's license yet, so my father had to go with me to come and collect it. And it was a good start. It was the first of hundreds of classic cars I've owned over the years. My grandmother stepped in one more time later on to fund my first Maserati, but I always paid her back. Always did that.
Never not pay back your grandmother.
No, I was very I always paid her back.
Then off to Leiden University to study law, and then joined Baker McKenzie's office in Amsterdam. What was your field of practice with Baker McKenzie?
It was very nice at the time. Of course, it was the largest law firm in the world. It was nothing but international transactions, mainly supporting transactions which were done in America. So I traveled a lot as a young boy to the United States to be assisting in those transactions. And I did that for 5 years, and I enjoyed it very much.
Then you're off to a company, Heerema?
Yeah.
Heerema, an offshore construction company.
Yeah.
Eventually became managing director.
Yeah.
And then in a management buyout process, you became part owner of one of their former divisions.
Yeah, actually, I started at Heerema when I was 28 as the director of business development. And in a matter of 2 years, we grew that company like it was going out of fashion. We made massive acquisitions. And then a period of consolidation started, and I'm not so much a guy for consolidation. I don't have the patience for that. So I saw an opportunity to buy one of the companies that we had acquired out of Heerema at the time. And that was my first move in 1991 as an entrepreneur. I had to borrow every single penny to make that acquisition, but I'm glad I did because it was a very, very good deal.
How important is it for young, emerging entrepreneurial leaders to get out and make that first deal regardless of the industry it's in?
It is extremely important. When I was a young guy, I always heard it's the most difficult thing to make your first million, right? That is so true. Once you've come over the hurdle to make your first transaction and make some money on the back of that, everything else is fairly easy. But the first deal, the first kill, if you will, is the most difficult one.
And after that kill, then off to a completely different industry, Emergo Fashion.
Yeah.
And how difficult is it to translate leadership skills from something like offshore construction to the fashion industry?
Not difficult at all. In effect, leadership has very little to do with the business that you're running. Leadership is about you and being able to get people to do what you want or what you tell them to in a way that they feel respected and motivated and inspired. And I don't think whether it really, I mean, certainly the offshore industry is more of a rough type of guy industry than the fashion industry, clearly. And the number of women in the offshore industry is fairly limited, I can assure you. But leadership as such doesn't change. I don't think you can change your leadership. You are what you are. If you have those skills, you can maybe hone them in, but you can't really become a leader by reading a book. I don't think so. You either have it or you don't. It's in your DNA, and if you have it, you can cultivate it, but if you don't have it, I think you should do something else.
Then the company got the rights to distribute McGregor sportswear across Europe. You changed the name to McGregor Fashion Group and took it public. Mm-hmm. Is an IPO for an entrepreneur kind of like graduation? Definitely in terms of going through the legal hassle that entails. We did that in '99. It was a very interesting experience. After that, I did it again with Spyker. I don't want to make a habit of it because it's very tiresome. On the other hand, it does give you, under normal market circumstances, access to capital that you would sometimes not easily find. So it was good for McGregor. We did very well with the company. We sold it off in 2006, and it was a very good deal. Then you went on, and as you said, you started your own car company, reincarnating the old name of Spyker, Dutch company from the 1920s. Tell us the heritage of Spyker. What was the company when it started?
Spyker was a very, very old company. It started with two brothers who had a coach building company and started it in 1875. And by 1898, they turned to car manufacturing. Well, to put things in perspective, in 1900, there were 4,000 car manufacturers in Europe. Think of a cold sanitation of an industry, right? Every coach builder, every blacksmith that could put his hands on a one-cylinder Benz or one-cylinder Dion Bouton engine called himself a car builder. And Spyker was one of those very few, very ingenious companies that made it up to 1925. They were the inventor of the first six-cylinder car. They were the inventor of the first four-wheel drive car, the first car to have four-wheel brakes. So it was a very innovative company, very much driven by engineering. And in 1914, they merged with the Dutch aircraft company and started building fighter aircraft for 4 years, whilst during the First World War there was very little demand for cars. And then by 1919, they still started building cars again, but cars built like airplanes. Very, very interesting designs. And the company lasted for another 6 years, and then one of the brothers had died, the other one had lost interest, and the company went out of business in voluntary liquidation in 1925.
Now, are you leading today's company that uses the same name and logo? Are you leading it to take the products towards the same vision, updated for this century? Or are you just using the name and something completely different?
Definitely not. The reason why we chose the Spyker name is because we're building cars at Spyker in exactly the same vein, if you will, as the original Spykers. Very high-end, beautiful craftsmanship, very ingenious, and made for a very selected audience. And that hasn't changed. When we started the company 75 years later on, those values were completely embraced by us.
Give us a quick overview of what the products are, how they're different.
Well, the Spyker cars we manufacture today are all aluminium space frame, hand-built, beautiful hand-built aluminium bodies, craftsmanship to the highest level, and high-performance engines, of course. So they're sports cars competing with the likes of the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis, Aston Martins. They're more of like a mid-engine variant of a Ferrari with an Aston Martin type of class. And we make 85 of them this year, so it's a very small company.
Now, so Spyker cars are obviously different than what most of us use for basic family transportation.
I guess so.
Both in what they are and in price point. No one, you've said that no one in the world really needs a Spyker.
Definitely not.
But people do want them.
Yeah.
How do you lead the company so that the people who are able to buy one want one, and you cater to their specific needs and wants?
Well, one of our great gurus, Gordon Gekko, learned us that greed is good, right? And greed is good because without greed there would be very little beyond the most simple things. Clearly, if you want to go from A to B, a Hyundai will do a fantastic job for you. You don't even need a Saab, let alone an Audi. The reason why people buy this kind of product is because they say something about the owner. They can afford a certain luxury, a certain thrill by driving a car like that, and clearly nobody needs a Spyker to go from A to B. Nobody needs a Saab. You can do with a cheap Chinese car if you want to. If you really want to get from A to B in a dry fashion, that will do the trick. Fortunately, people are very much driven by emotions when they buy cars. It's one of the most emotional, large purchases a human being makes during his life. And if you then create a brand which entices people to want to own you, you can actually sell product. And this is something that's been going on for ages, and it works.
Now a lot of people have tried this with specialty small volume cars. I'm thinking in the United States in the 40s, Tucker, later on Bricklin, DeLorean. It's a risky business.
It's extremely risky business.
So why does an entrepreneur invest their time and invest their capital in such a high risk business?
Well, first of all, I started up with my own time and my own capital. So the most risky phase, I covered myself. Only when there was a business to invite others to participate in, did I actually do that. So it was my own money at stake, and burning your own money, I don't think there's anything against that. There is a classic joke about the car industry, and that is that in order to make a small fortune, you have to start with a big one. And I can fully subscribe to that, by the way. It's absolutely true. On the other hand, I've had a life and an experience going through the years in the car industry that I would never trade with anything else. It is a fantastic industry. It is very dynamic. It's very competitive, but it's also a very nice kind of people that are in the car industry. So you have a blast at the same time. You're burning your money, but you have a lot of fun.
Let's talk about a real-world David and Goliath story. A small company called Spyker tries to buy a bigger company called Saab from a bigger company called General Motors.
The biggest company called Saab.
With national governments involved. What made you think you could pull off the deal? Everyone said it was an impossible task.
I truly believe that the more people say that something cannot be done, the higher the chances that it can be done. People are like sheep. They follow each other, right? So the more people keep on telling each other that something can be done means that there must be an opportunity to actually achieve it. Everybody and their grandmothers told me that Saab could never be acquired by Spyker, which made me even more determined to actually prove them wrong. And we did. Only in a perfect storm that raged through this industry in 2008, 2009, could you see a situation arise that a minute player like Spyker could buy a relative giant like Saab from the largest car maker in the world, General Motors, which in turn had come into the most unthinkable circumstances, i.e. a Chapter 11 situation. In order to be able to survive, General Motors had to divest of a number of brands, Hummer, Pontiac, Saturn, Saab, and the only way they could do that was by trying to sell them off. Well, that failed miserably, and the only one that got away was Saab. The reason why they had to do that was they had to rationalize their product portfolio and their brand portfolio because they had put their hand in the most holy grail of all holy grails, the American taxpayer money. And the American taxpayer owning 61% of that company basically didn't want to invest large sums of money in a small Swedish niche automaker.
Now, you've said before that when you were going through the negotiations to purchase Saab, you really had 5 business deals going on at the same time. What were they?
That was the most difficult thing about it. All these 5 transactions were intertwined. I had to think of Winston Churchill on many occasions. He said, when you're going through hell, keep going. And that's really what we did. First of all, we were buying Saab from General Motors. That was not easy, but at least we had a very professional corporate adversary. Secondly, we had to obtain a loan from the European Investment Bank to fund the business plan in the amount of 400 million euros, $550 million at the time. That wasn't easy. Pulling teeth. The loan had to be guaranteed by the European Investment Bank's counterparty, and that was the Swedish government. The government had to issue this 400 million euro guarantee. That was not easy. And then finally, there were 2 more deals to be done. There's no way that you can actually sell cars if you don't have any funding for the production of those cars by means of flooring at the dealers and funding the cars when they come offline. And that was done with GMAC, currently called Ally. That was a very complicated transaction in its own right. But to top it all off, in the process of acquiring the company, objections arose against my partner, Vladimir Antonov. Unjustified objections at the time. Unfortunately, we didn't have the leeway to go and reject them. So I bought my partner out in the process. So I was playing 5 chess games at the same time, blindfolded more or less. It was very complicated. But we were only a team of 5 guys working 20 hours a day, and then you can achieve massive things because there's no distraction. You're just working, and you get this rush, right? You don't even think about sleeping anymore. You don't know what your name is. You just keep on going for 3 months, and after that you still can't sleep because you're so cranked up, and adrenaline has taken your body completely over. But it is an interesting experience. I think it's the closest experience you can get to war without a gun.
I like it. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll talk with Victor Muller about rebuilding Saab after the purchase was complete. Welcome back to Leaders on Leadership. Joining us today is Victor Muller, CEO of Spyker Cars and Chair of Saab Automobile. We're talking about his leadership to rebuild Saab after buying it from General Motors. The Spyker logo, your first company, has the phrase in Latin, for the tenacious, there's no road is impassable.
Absolutely right.
What's the more impassable road, buying the company or now rebuilding it now that you own it?
Well, neither is impossible or impassable. The initial acquisition, as I described it, was extremely complicated, but we got it done. But of course, you don't get any time to catch your breath, because once you've got it, then the real work starts, right? We had a factory which had no product in it. The company had been put into voluntary liquidation. There were no cars in the production line. All of the supply chain had basically collapsed because everybody thought there was never going to be built another Saab. The only thing we had going for us, we had a phenomenal brand, be it tarnished, and the most motivated workforce you'll ever find. So the first job we had was to put the company back on its feet. That was a humongous task. But the Swedes were, more dedicated people you'll never find. And within a matter of a few months, we were churning out cars, and we were restarting the relationship with the pretty beat up suppliers.
Now, everything I read in the press when this happened was supportive. Everybody thought this was a great idea. As you're leading the company, now that you're chair, how do you lead it so that the euphoria of the reprieve from certain death doesn't get in the way of just all the hard work that has to happen?
Well, that's definitely not in my DNA. I'm very much down to earth, and nobody gets any chance to get carried away by the euphoria of the moment. That lasts for a few hours, and then it's back to business. And the urgency of the situation was such that we didn't get any time to linger on the success of the acquisition anyway. The problems that came towards us were so humongous that it was very quickly forgotten that we managed to save the company. Only this year at Christmas, when there was just a relative calm, I had the chance to compare it with last year's Christmas, that is 2009. And you wonder, how did we ever manage to get this thing done, right? It was just mind-blowing.
Now, when Bob Lutch was on the show a couple of years ago, he said that when he went back to General Motors as vice chairman for product, his job wasn't to help them make better cars. It was to break down the system and allow the General Motors people to make the good cars they know how to do. Are you going to remake Saab in your image, or let Saab be Saab?
No. Saab is one of those very few iconic brands. Only once in your lifetime will you get an opportunity to buy a brand like that. The brand DNA is extremely clear. It's a beautiful Swedish brand, very crisp, very clean, aviation heritage, and very much developed by and for independent thinkers. So that brand is very clear. What happened over time when GM owned it is that it lost some of its DNA. It started to become like mainstream, less pronounced in terms of its brand DNA. And we don't have to do any rocket scientist work to the brand. We only have to go back to its roots and develop the brand on the basis of what it was, what it has always been, a very independent company. So that's really where we're at. It's not rocket science. It's pretty simple, actually.
As you said, Saab has the image of being a bit quirky, having its own personality. Well, Spyker cars are have the same attribute, but at the other end of the spectrum. Are there things that they can do for and with each other, but still not come into some amorphous middle mass?
You're absolutely right. It would be blasphemy to mix the two brands, right? Because a Spyker is a Spyker and a Saab is a Saab. You don't create Saab Spykers or Spyker Saabs. That's like cursing in church, and we wouldn't want to do that. But clearly, there are a lot of benefits for both brands. One of the benefits is clearly that Saab has a huge distribution of 1,000 dealers worldwide. Slowly but surely, Saab dealers are now starting to pick up the Spyker brand in their showrooms. So that's a fantastic way of expanding the distribution network. Saab has a parts bin you couldn't imagine. So where you can imagine that if you make 100 cars a year, your starter motor will be $600. If you make 100,000 a year, it's $60, right? So we will be able to tap into those resources and reduce the bill of materials of a Spyker tremendously. Just two of the examples that I could give you.
Is it, so far in the experience, is it more difficult to lead a company that you're starting up like Spyker, or to lead a company that you need to rebuild like Saab?
It's much more difficult to start up a company from scratch. Much more difficult, because you start by serving your own coffee and picking up the phone and writing your own bills, and create a company that has to, it's nothing, right? It starts from a greenfield operation. Saab was a 63-year-old company, completely honed in detail to run a car manufacturing business like nothing else. Relatively speaking, it's so much easier to turn Saab around than to start Spyker.
You've said a lot of times, and other people have said it too, that the Saab brand was too good to let die, and so everyone was happy when you resurrected. As an entrepreneurial leader, how much of business decisions are emotional and how much are just cold spreadsheet analysis? 100%
emotional.
Yeah.
I would never take a decision purely based on figures. If I wouldn't have a good feeling, a gut feel about them, I don't think I would even be called an entrepreneur. I think what sets entrepreneurs apart from non-entrepreneurs, without making any qualifications, is that an entrepreneur contains his fears better than a non-entrepreneur. You have the boundary for where you go into distress mode is much further away than with other people. The fact that you control your fears means that you can look at things in a different way. But in the end, I think that most of the decisions that, definitely my decisions, are made very much based on a gut feel. Are we going to pull this off? The figures look fantastic, right? But they're just figures, they're just paper. What really, really is important is the people behind the paperwork. You can have the most fantastic business plan, but if the people that you're looking at in the factory are all having hollow eyes and they have no clue what to do, you know that these figures are never going to materialize. So the gut feel is based on your observations in a business. Are these people capable of executing this business plan or not? Or are we just barking up the wrong tree here? And I think with Saab, we made the very, very correct decision to look much more at the people at Saab and their conviction that they could pull it off and their dedication and their tenacity than the paperwork. Because the paperwork, I don't think that anyone in his right mind would have made the decision purely on the paperwork.
So entrepreneurs control their fear. It's not that they don't have fear.
Oh, sure. If you don't have fear, you'll become reckless. If you're reckless, you'll die. So the question is, where is this fine line between controlling your fear and not turning into a reckless lunatic that just goes for it and doesn't think about the consequences?
Okay, I've got one last question, Victor. One of the boats in your collection was built originally for Malcolm Forbes. Let's assume one night you're on the boat, it's late at night, the spirit of Malcolm Forbes comes out and says, I'll answer one leadership question for you. What are you going to ask him?
Whoa. Well, I must say that having not only owned Malcolm Forbes' boat for a while, but also having read a lot about him, I can assure you that man was something else, right? He was a true leader. If I had to ask him one question is probably, when do you quit? When do you quit?
When do you quit? That's a good question. Thank you, Victor.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being here. Please join us again next time for another edition of Leaders on Leadership. See you then.
Major funding for Leaders on Leadership is provided by Greenleaf Trust.
Helping people manage their wealth, accumulate assets, and preserve those assets for generational continuity implies trust. We are sitting down on the same side of the desk as you are. We're planning for your financial needs.
Additional funding provided by the Wayne State University School of Business Administration.
An encore presentation of Leaders on Leadership is available on demand for viewing at DetroitPublicTV.org.